Welcome into the best in true crime podcasting. This is True Crime Tuesday. I'm Tim Dennis. I have an unusual and a very interesting story today on True Crime Tuesday. Let's just put ourselves in the shoes of others for this story and present to you a very scary scenario. You know, a lot of us take trips abroad every year. We go to different destinations for business, for pleasure, for just to get away, really. And there's some beautiful vacation spots. There's some beautiful spots to visit throughout the world. One of those spots is Thailand. And there's more to Thailand than just Bangkok. There's other areas in the region of Thailand to see, and some beautiful regions at that. And there's some that are hidden off the coast of Thailand. There's a little idyllic island out there off the coast of Thailand that you'd certainly want to see if you didn't realize it had a seedy underbelly. And I'm bringing aboard a guest today to talk about a book that's out there now called The Curse of the Turtle. It's out there by Wild Blue Press, and it's written by our guest. Our guest is Suzanne Buchanan. She's the exiled former owner and editor of the Samui Times news publication in Thailand. She's taken part in a documentary called Love in a Foreign Climate for ITV, and is interviewed in a 3-part documentary series for Sky Documentaries about the murders and suspicious deaths, which came out this month, didn't it, Suzanne, in March of 2022?
It did, yeah.
Okay. The Curse of the Turtle is the true story of Thailand's backpacker murders, which we'll talk about today, and was released earlier this month by Wild Blue Press. And we're going to talk about that today on True Crime Tuesday. Let's welcome to True Crime Tuesday, Suzanne Buchanan. Hello, Suzanne. How are you today?
I'm good, thank you. Great to meet you. How are you doing?
Great to meet you as well. I'm doing very well. The name of this place is Koh Tao, which is a small island in the Gulf of Thailand. And it's got some pristine beaches and lots of sun, tourists, divers, backpackers. And it's a little bit of a facade, I guess you could say, isn't it?
Yeah, you could say that. I mean, on the face of it, Koh Tao, which in England is Turtle Island, is absolutely beautiful. It's only accessible by speedboat, so it's deliciously secret. It's got amazing diving. It's got amazing bars and restaurants. It's got an amazing climate. And it looks like heaven on earth when you first get there. But there's a little bit more going on to Koh Tao than meets the average eye, really.
How did you first come about Koh Tao? Was it simply a personal reason to get away on vacation? Did you have an assignment at the time on the island?
Well, I was born and bred in the UK, but I have family in Australia, and I used to spend a lot of time in Sydney. And then for visa reasons, I had to leave Australia for a while. So I went to Vanuatu in the South Pacific. And in Vanuatu, I learned how to scuba dive. And I ended up staying there for quite some time. And then when I went back to Sydney, I was not that impressed with all the hustle and bustle. And I really had enjoyed island life. And I was looking for somewhere to go where I could pursue my diving. I wanted to become a diving instructor. And I found Koh Tao. It's an absolute mecca for divers. You can very quickly go through the PADI, Professional Association of Dive Instructors system on Koh Tao. So I thought, well, I'll go there for 6 months, become a dive instructor and see what happens. So that's what initially took me there.
So you get the diving instructor certificate and you think, all right, I got it made. I'm going to be a diving instructor. Things are going to be, just peachy. And I've got life all figured out after being in Australia and being in the UK. But it's not so easy to become a diving instructor, is it?
Well, you know what? They made it pretty easy. I mean, there's so many people going there to go through that process. And I just loved it. I popped out the other end with a dive instructor ticket. I had an underwater video camera. I was doing underwater videography, teaching students every day, and just thinking I'd arrive. I was living this incredible lifestyle. There's very few rules, especially on the islands in Thailand. So every night was Saturday night. You can come and go as you please. You can pretty much do whatever you want. It's a life with no 9 to 5, no boundaries. And I was living the absolute dream.
Oh, all right. So at that point, how was it you formed then I believe it's the Samui News, correct? Or Samui Times. Samui Times.
Basically what happened, Tim, was I'd left Koh Tao and gone to the main island. There's 3 islands in the Gulf of Thailand. You've got Koh Tao, then you've got Koh Phangan, which is famous for the full moon parties, and I enjoyed probably too many of those. And then you've got a larger island, Koh Samui. And I moved to Koh Samui, where I started my own dive school with a Thai female friend of mine. And then after about 9 years, I was getting a little bit tired of diving the same dive sites all the time. And as much as I enjoyed being around tourists, I was getting asked the same questions every day. You know, how often do you go back to the UK? What do you miss about home? And I was just burning out a little bit. And a friend of mine had a little magazine called Samui Explorer, and his writer had left. And he said to me, hey, how do you fancy coming out and doing a couple of restaurant reviews with me? It's free food. I do the photography. All you have to do is write a review. And I thought, well, I don't know if I'm any good at writing, but I'll give it a go. I mean, you know, the free food was pretty tempting because food's nice in Thailand. So I gave it a go. I did a couple of reviews and they went down an absolute bomb. And I loved it. And then after a little while, 2 bi-weekly newspapers owned by Filipinos contacted me and said, could you come and write for us? We want someone to cover local events, things like the regatta, interviews, more restaurant reviews. And I thought, absolutely, you know. So that's really how I started writing. I was running around the island interviewing people. I was the go-to person if you wanted anything in the paper. It made me quite popular. And people were complaining there was no daily newspaper. So a friend of mine who was really good in IT said, listen, why don't we just start an online news publication? You know, you've got a good following with the other papers. So in 2013, we started the Samui Times. And at that point, I started investigating crimes as well as just covering local news and events. So that's really how it all started.
Getting completely off track here, how in 2013 does an online newspaper pay for itself? Because I would think that's a little ahead of the curve of now when papers are actually asking you to pay online.
Yeah, well, at the time, I mean, you know, it was only a small publication, but it was being read in over 100 countries. Mm-hmm. We were attracting 150,000 visitors a month. And we just paid for it with advertisers who, you know, couldn't wait to be on board. So we very quickly were making money. You know, within a couple of months, we were making money from advertising. So it was a dream, really.
Interesting. Very interesting indeed. So you start to cover the crime beat as well as other beats as well. And you're getting into the crime beat. Is this a beat that tripped your trigger, so to speak, or is this something that was a little unseemly, but you went along with it?
Well, it was interesting. I mean, you know, I was covering road accidents, and that didn't seem to upset anybody. I mean, there's a lot of road accidents in Thailand. Nobody really wears helmets. People drink drive quite regularly. But I'd have some things that I put up, especially with regard to the jet ski scams in Thailand. In Thailand, there's jet ski scams where an unscrupulous jet ski operator would say you've damaged a jet ski when you hadn't, mm-hmm. and try and extort money from you to fix it. And every time I covered those stories, I'd get phone calls saying you don't want to upset the jet ski families. You get that out of your paper. It's making the island look bad. So I very quickly realized there was things I could report on, and there were things I couldn't report on. And you know, some local people were not happy if I reported anything to do with them. So I realized I was on a bit dodgy ground, but I just simply avoided reporting on anything that would upset anybody.
So really, there's no free press in Thailand. It's the press of the statues. Not statues, the press of the privileged, put it that way.
I mean, in terms of my paper, I mean, essentially it was a blog. Okay. So I wasn't, you know, having to worry about laws per se, but certainly on the islands are run by what they call the local mafia. Now, this is not Sicilian mafia. Mm-hmm. You have to remember on the islands, there were people living there before any administrative bodies were on the islands, before there were any police, before there were anything, you know, they were just little tropical islands. So the people who originally lived on the islands were running the islands, looking after the islands, and every village kind of has a headman. And he's the go-to person if you've got a problem. So, you know, these mafia are really influential families who were there long before tourists, long before administrative bodies, and they run the islands. And they're the people that you don't want to upset, basically. So if I was, you know, treading on dodgy ground, someone would say, oh, we've spoken to so-and-so from this village on this island. He's not happy about that, but just take it out of the paper. So, yeah, I mean, I wasn't legally prohibited from doing stories, but when you live on islands, and you know, you have to be careful who you're upsetting, because boats and planes don't leave every 5 seconds. So, and I didn't want to ever leave Thailand. It's a beautiful place. I've got a gorgeous house there I have built. So I would just tread carefully.
Was there ever a time in your recollection where one of these 5 heads of the family would be able to reach out to you and give you a lead, or actually were on the up and up and you could go to them and ask for a lead on a story?
No, you never get direct contact with them. They have a group of people around them who kind of look after their interests. So you never really deal with them directly. They're too powerful.
Okay. So you're beginning to get the lay of the land, so to speak, and you've got these 5 mafia family heads, for lack of a better term. We'll call them that, even though they're loosely based big families on the island. And they control different areas of the island.
On Koh Tao, there's 5 main areas, but the biggest area is Sairi Beach. That's the biggest stretch of beach. That's the stretch of beach that has the most bars and restaurants. And there's, the family who run that beach are very wealthy. You can't have any business on Sairi Beach that doesn't, you're either renting the building from them or you're in partnership with them. So that's the biggest family. And Sairi Beach is where most of the incidents that, happened over the years, they're on Sairi purely because it's the biggest tourist spot on Koh Tao.
Now, is there an overreaching part of the government that has an eye on them, or do they pretty much leave them alone?
Absolutely not. There's no one keeping an eye on them. Koh Tao is a small island. There's only a couple of police that are stationed there. Those police are known to take what's called tea money from local businesses, and they basically do whatever those families tell them to do. So, your rank is the mafia first. The police very much come underneath them.
And I take it that the 5 heads of the family are also paying off any officials that may be national or even regional.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, it's such an outpost. Koh Tao is such an outpost that, it pretty much runs itself. There's no reason for anyone in authority to ever really go there until something went really wrong in 2014. But yeah, I would imagine that anyone comes down that they don't want there, they just pay them to go away.
Very interesting indeed. So this main part of the island, is it mainly entertainment? That's how they made their money, or was there an actual resource there that they made their money on?
No, it's just tourism. It's purely tourism. I mean, it started off with diving. Mm-hmm. We're going there scuba diving, and then obviously a few resorts popped up, and then more divers came, and more restaurants, more resorts. Back in the day, it was internet cafes, massage parlors. There's a few chemists, because like pharmacies. You don't need prescriptions in Thailand, so people like to buy all sorts of stuff from there for various different reasons, as beauty parlors, stuff like that. So it just developed and got bigger and bigger and bigger, and is incredibly lucrative.
Very interesting indeed. So now there's, as you mentioned, an incident that happens, which kind of shakes Koh Tao to its very bones, but in that, there's a lot of misconception around the incident. Explain to us what happens and why there's misconception. Obviously, there's something that rarely happens on the island in the form of a murder. Mm-hmm.
Well, I wouldn't say it's rare. I mean, having looked into it since, but we'll get back to that. Okay. So my newspaper is chugging along really nicely. We're getting good readership. The advertisers are happy. I'm enjoying being a journalist. I mean, I'm not trained to be a journalist. So, where else in the world could you become a journalist overnight? Mm-hmm. So it's been for over a year. And then I get a phone call to say there's 2 dead bodies on Sairi Beach. And Sairi Beach is overseen by the most powerful family on the island. And I'm like, what do you mean there's 2 dead bodies? At this point, I had no idea who they were. So I was making phone calls and, asking people in the know what had happened. And it turned out it was 2 British backpackers that had been found dead on the beach. At this point, they could have drowned for all I knew. But in Thailand, we have rescue organizations. They're local rescue organizations who go out to major incidents. And the rescue organizations love taking photographs of crime scenes, accidents, and they just post them on their Facebook page. So it didn't take me very long to just go onto the Koh Tao Rescue Facebook page. And I saw the pictures of these dead bodies. And I absolutely couldn't believe it. The brutality of the attack on the girl was mind-blowing. I mean, it must have been a really frenzied, prolonged attack. Her injuries were absolutely horrendous. She was found on the beach, spread-eagled, naked from the waist down, and there was very little left of her face, of her head. Now, in Thailand, you've got a concept of losing face. If you embarrass a Thai person, that can cause a great deal of problem. So losing face is a bit of an obsession with the Thais. And I remember looking at this girl's head that was, not really there anymore, thinking, wow, she's literally lost face, because there were very few injuries to the rest of her body, although it was very obvious she'd been raped. The guy who was dead was found in the waters next to her, and he didn't have obvious injuries, although when I got more photographs from the crime scene, you could see there had been multiple stab wounds. But, this girl had literally been bludgeoned to death, and it was really quite disturbing to see that, this woman in this much mess. And I thought, crikey, this is a mafia owner-run beach. Someone really powerful must have done this, because I can't imagine anyone wanting to leave that kind of mess on a mafia beach. I was like, what's gone on here?
Now, here's the first question that comes up when I see that, you have this group that likes to, did you say they're the Koh Tao group?
Yeah, the rescue group, the Koh Tao Rescue Organization.
What exactly is this organization that goes out and takes pictures and posts them on the internet? To me, and I'll ask you why in a second.
Yeah, I mean, really in Thailand, I think because of reincarnation, they're not offended by pictures of dead bodies. So even in the printed national papers, if someone's come off their bike and died, there'll be a graphic photograph of that on the front cover. And the rescue organizations just like to advertise, what they're doing. They might go and take a snake, a snake like a python out of someone's house. They might go and help a woman who's given birth on the side of the road when she didn't realize, her due date was then. And they'll just happily throw photographs of that, all over their Facebook pages.
I don't know why, Suzanne, but that in American terms, that seems kind of horrifying. But I guess it's okay there. But to me, I'm thinking, in an American crime scene, you would think you would want to preserve as much of the scene as you can, rather than just have them rooting through things and taking pictures, right?
Yeah, I mean, they're essentially there. I mean, like the one on Koh Tao, there's a British guy. He's ex-military. He's a paramedic, and he turns up to all of any incident he'll turn up to. And I'd speak to him a lot and ask him questions about various crime scenes. But even at the temples, there's boards outside, and they're covered in photographs, glossy photographs of, things the rescue teams have done. So there's a very different attitude towards privacy in Thailand than there would be anywhere else.
I guess I'm shocked a little bit, because I think to myself, and don't get me wrong, there's a thirst, I guess, for that kind of thing here in America. But to me, it just seems so out there. So
it is. I mean, horrifyingly, if you we discovered this couple on the beach. They weren't actually a couple. They met when they were out there. It turned out to be Hannah Witheridge, who was 23. And David Miller. Hannah's from Norfolk and David's from Jersey. If you Google their names now, and I'm not suggesting you would, but you can still find the crime scene images on the internet now from the US or from the UK.
And just the lack of professionalism of combing a crime scene to see who exactly you could narrow it down to.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the photographs that came up of the crime scene pretty quickly. I mean, there were people walking all over the crime scene. There were tourists taking photographs of the dead bodies. There was only a couple of police on the island, but very quickly word spread to Bangkok, and Bangkok sent about 60 police officers down. But by then, God only knows who'd been on the crime scene. They did try and rope it off. But there's photographs, you can quite clearly see one of the members of the influential family just stepping over the rope, wandering around the crime scene. I don't know what he was doing there. Yeah, I mean, the investigation was absolutely bungled from the start, because people were just wandering around taking photographs of the bodies. I've got one crime scene photograph where the victim's clothes are strewn all over the beach. And the very next picture, those clothes have been folded up and put on a rock. So it's like, well, what's going on here?
Yeah. Yeah. You don't want to move anything until the police have been there to gather and catalog and dust for prints. And I cringe.
Later, the police were there hours, literally. I mean, the bodies were found at about 5:36 in the morning. It was hours later. I mean, it's even on a plane, it takes an hour and a half to get down to Samui. So it would have been 3 or 4 hours minimum before, anyone in any authority got down there.
It's amazing. Just in this situation, let me just ask you this, Suzanne, what island authority or family authority or any authority would have been able to hold people off? Is there any?
Not really. I mean, as I say, there was only a couple of police on the island. I mean, they weren't prepared for it. They're not the most well-educated people. I mean, in Thailand, if you want a job in the police, you basically buy your position. You don't go through police school. So your family would club together and buy you the highest position. And then, the higher rank you are within the police force, the more of the cut of the tea money you get. So, they're known for being a bit haphazard anyway, but I'm not sure who could have really contained that crime scene. But no, I mean, I've got photographs of people literally just walking all over it.
Oh, my God. And shocking. It's just shocking.
Yeah, so when you live there, it's so normal. It becomes so normal. You don't think anything of it, really.
That's even more shocking that it's just so normal that it's not it doesn't cause an impact.
No, island life is, and I think unless you've lived in Thailand, you never really get it. I mean, it's I was there for 20 years, and it's amazing what you can become used to. It's just amazing what becomes your norm. I mean, you just become so desensitized to crime scenes and crime scene pictures. I look at crime scene pictures now that are horrific, and all I'm doing is looking for clues. It's not even making me queasy. It's strange how desensitized you get when you've seen so much.
That is crazy indeed. So as they're looking at these two dead bodies and the damage that's been done to these bodies, when police finally get there, do they have an idea of motive or suspect or what they're thinking?
Interestingly, when they got there, they didn't seem to know what to do. I mean, they said they found a used condom on the beach, which I thought it was interesting. If Hannah had been raped, the rapist had bothered to use contraception. Mm-hmm. They found a wine bottle, but I mean, you've got to remember, there's hundreds of tourists on this beach every night. So, a wine bottle being left could have been left by absolutely anyone.
Right.
They found some cigarette butts, but, the beaches are littered with bottles and cigarette butts in the morning. And it was actually the beach cleaner who originally found the bodies. She went and told one of the heads of that family that controlled that beach, and he went down to the crime scene. She apparently or somebody rang the police and said they'd seen bodies, but the police didn't even make a note of her name. So we're not sure, who actually told the police that the bodies were there. But it was the beach cleaner that found them. But the police didn't seem to know what was going on. But by then the press had turned up on the island. And a guy called Jonathan from Sky, he was on the island, and he decided he'd start looking for some CCTV footage. And he went to a local dive shop and actually found CCTV footage of Hannah and David walking around on the little road, which is not too far from the beach. And he was really chilled by that because he thought, crikey, that, this is the last images of them actually alive. Mm-hmm. When he'd found CCTV footage, I think the police got a bit embarrassed, and then they released their own still shot from some CCTV saying, oh, look, we found this image of Hannah and David. But mind-blowingly, it wasn't Hannah and David. It was an Asian girl and a guy that bore no resemblance to David. So, the only thing that the police released to the press was the wrong people. So we knew it was a fairly bungled investigation. Anyway, eventually they put a guy called Panya Mayman in charge of the investigation. He's a very senior police officer from Bangkok. And amazingly, he took one of the powerful locals in for questioning. And I'm like, I can't believe this. They've arrested one of the mafia. And there have been a lot of rumors on the islands that, this crime had been committed by this powerful local family, which seemed to make sense to me because who else would, mess up their beach? This guy gets taken in for questioning, and we're like, this is unbelievable. Like, who has the balls really to arrest a member of this family? And the whole house of cards is going to come tumbling down because, you know, these families, when they have disputes, they don't go to the police, they deal with it in the house. Mm-hmm. So, wow. But then very quickly, within literally a few hours, that guy was let go. That policeman was taken off the case, and a new policeman was put in charge of the whole investigation.
And we're back to square one.
And we're back to square one. So the original press release was that they'd arrested a member of this family. They were looking for another member of this family who had fled the island. And he said no scapegoats would be used, which I thought was an interesting press statement. He said, you know, he wouldn't be put off by mafia and powerful local people, that he had video evidence that proved 2 of these family members were involved in these murders. And he was, you know, making press statements to that effect. Next thing, he's gone, he's disappeared, he's not there anymore, and someone else has taken over. And yeah, we're back to square one.
Interesting indeed. Let's take our break a little bit early here, Suzanne. And when we come back, let's figure out where we go from pursuing mafia members to going completely off the beaten path and going to a stereotypical suspect, which it seems kind of weird, but we're going in that direction anyways. We need to come up with a suspect. We might as well blame a crowd in Thailand that's looked down upon. That's where we're going next. The name of the book is The Curse of the Turtle, the true story of Thailand's backpacker murders. Suzanne Buchanan is our guest. The book is released on Wild Blue Press, and we'll have a link for the book here in the description of this show. You can just click on that book, or click on that link rather, and pick up the book. Do that while we're in the break here. When we come back, more with Suzanne Buchanan, The Curse of the Turtle, here on True Crime Tuesday. Welcome back to the best in true crime podcasting. This is True Crime Tuesday. I'm Tim Dennis. Our guest is Suzanne Buchanan. The name of the book is The Curse of the Turtle, the true story of Thailand's backpacker murders. Suzanne Buchanan is our guest, and we're talking about, actually we're smack dab in the middle of a couple of murders on Koh Tao, and we're talking about the fact that one policeman from Thailand is brought in, or from, I forget which region of Thailand you said it was, Suzanne.
Bangkok. He was thrown down from Bangkok. From
Bangkok, that's right. And brought into the murders and says, I've got one of the heads of the mafia, or one of the family of the mafia that I've brought in as a suspect. He looks pretty good. Another member of this family of the mafia has run away, and we think he's at least someone we want to question, if not a suspect. And I'm not gonna bow. I'm not gonna bow down to any mafia members. I'm not going to bow down to any corruption. We believe these are the 2 best suspects. And all of a sudden he's gone, and another police person is put in his place. And then we pick it up from there. And it's...
Yeah, the new guy comes in, and we're all left thinking, what's going on here? Then rumor very much started up on the islands that, you know, they didn't want to admit that Thai people had committed this crime. And actually... At the time, Thailand was under military rule, and the junta, he made a press statement, 2 interesting press statements, actually. One, he said, if you're a very pretty girl wearing a bikini in Thailand, you can't really expect us to protect you. And the second one was that no Thai national would ever commit a crime like this. So it couldn't be a Thai person. Now, on the islands, the main labor is done by the Burmese. The Burmese are not really very well respected in Thailand. They're just used for their cheap labor. Mm-hmm. They come as migrant workers. They're exploited. Many of them are brought in. They come in illegally by brokers. They don't have proper work permits. They just pay the local police who stamp a little card for them to let them work there. They're the waiters, the beach cleaners, the washer-uppers. You know, they really are the legs of the island, the engine of the islands. But they're not very well regarded. There's a very long historic dispute between Thailand and Burma, and the Thais really don't have much respect for the Burmese. And everyone started saying, that they're going to fit up Burmese for this because they're not going to want their own nationals to look bad. They've got a lucrative tourist industry to protect. And then there was a copycat murder on the mainland where a murder and rape took place just as Hannah and David's. And that was Thai people who were arrested and imprisoned. So his statement that a Thai person could not commit a crime of this magnitude was, proved to be rubbish. But anyway, just over 2 weeks after the murders, as we all suspected, they arrested 2 Burmese migrant workers, and that's Wei Pure and Zorlin, 22-year-olds who were on the island basically earning money for their impoverished families back in Burma who were, peasant farmers, and sending money back. And they arrested these guys. They were absolutely tiny. And they said, look, here we go. We've got our men. I mean, none of us could really believe it, even though we suspected that's what they do all along.
Which is a shame, because at that point, there's really not a tie to them in the crime scene, is there?
No, there wasn't. And I thought, crikey, what's happened? So I started looking around for some legal representation for them, because when they were taken in, they were just taken in as witnesses. They were questioned as witnesses. And then all of a sudden they made this confession. They actually did confess to the crimes. When I got Andy Hall involved, who is a human rights lawyer, we went down to the prison. They'd been moved to the island I was living on, Koh Samui, and they said they'd been tortured into confession. The police had them for hours naked in an air-conditioned room, which, being in an air-conditioned room naked doesn't sound that horrendous, especially if you're from the UK. Mm-hmm. But in that heat, that humidity, you feel the cold a lot. But they said the police had threatened to chop off their arms and legs, to burn them in burning tires. They'd had their testicles pinged for hours. They'd had plastic bags put over their head. And they eventually just, after a couple of days of this, just both gave in and signed a confession document that was in Thai. They're Burmese. They couldn't read it. They couldn't understand it. They were also told if they confessed to the crimes, they'd only do 2 or 3 years in prison. That's how it panned out. So there they were, these 2 tiny kids in this prison in Koh Samui. And, they only come up to my breastbone, and I'm 5'5". They're just tiny. They had no previous criminal convictions. What confused me is if they'd even managed to overcome David, who's 6'2", 6'3", when these guys are barely 5 feet. Why did they stick around? If I'd have made that kind of mess on a mafia beach, I'd be back in Burma the next day.
Right.
But I spoke to their employers. They both turned up for work the next day. They hadn't got a mark on them. Their demeanor was no different. They never denied being on the beach that night, but they just got up the next day, went to work, carried on as normal, didn't try to leave the island. It seemed pretty unlikely to me that the police had the right guys.
Yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of questions that come up there, too. I mean, not only did you mention that, they went to work, there wasn't a mark on them, but you would think they'd be quite nervous on top of everything else. Their behavior would be erratic, that, like you mentioned, they wouldn't try to get home to Burma, at least, even if it seemed like they were going to wait out their passport and then try to go. They didn't do that either. And as you mentioned earlier before, passports back and forth to Burma were very short. At one time, wasn't it like 28 days? Like the shortest one is 28 days. The longest one is only a few months.
Well, for visa entry.
Yeah.
Yeah, Zorlin actually he had a passport, and he did actually have a work permit. Okay. Way Pure, like many Burmese, was in the country illegally. And the Thais have no problem employing illegal immigrants. So he didn't even have a legal, right to be in the country, but he was just working in the bar. So
they believe they're signing a confession that's only going to put them away for a few years. But who is it that actually tells them that they're only going away for a few years? Is it someone in the police department that tells them this?
Yeah, they told me that when the police were interrogating them or torturing them, they just said, look, sign it. That, the worst you're going to do is a couple of years. The confession document, I don't even think they knew it was a confession document. And their translator was a Rohingya from Burma. Well, and the boys, Wei Pure and Zorlin, they're Arakan, and there's a big dispute between Arakan and Rohingyas in Burma anyway. So I don't know why he was the translator. But when it actually came to court, that translator was so unfamiliar with the Thai language, written and spoken, that he had to have his own translator. Mm. So why would a translator need a translator? So, the boys were just really frightened. They couldn't understand what was going on. And as soon as they saw us turn up, they withdrew their confessions. They were very relieved. They thought, thank goodness someone's come to rescue us. And they just thought, we'd clear it up. It was a misunderstanding, and they'd go home.
Where does Sean McCanna come into all this?
Sean McCanna is a Scottish guy. Now, he was living on the island, and he was a friend of David Miller, one of the victims. They were really good friends. I think they met each other when David was at Leeds University in the UK. So, they're old-time friends on the island. Not long after the murders, Sean posts something on his Facebook saying the mafia are trying to kill me. And he was escorted off the island by Jonathan, who was working for Sky. Now, he said that the members of the influential family, the one who was taken in for questioning, was chasing him around the island. And he said to him, look, you killed those two people. You're going to hang yourself tonight. You're going to hang yourself tonight. And Sean just fled in fear of his life after posting photographs to his Facebook of this guy saying, the mafia did it. The mafia are trying to kill me. The next day, he managed to get off the island. He gave an interview before he flew out of Thailand. And he said, I think they wanted scapegoats. But interestingly, when he gave the interview saying the mafia were trying to kill him, we noticed that the guitar he was holding had blood on it. And he also had a stab wound on his arm that completely matched the kind of injuries that David Miller had. So we were a bit suspicious about him. But he maintains that, he had nothing to do with it. The injury to his arm was from the day before. He wasn't with David the night of the murders, but he fled the island in fear of his life, saying the mafia were trying to kill him.
So there's a 50-50 shot there that he was at least being chased by the same people who killed David and is it Hannah? Is that her name?
Yeah. I mean, he was definitely being chased by the guy who was taken in for questioning. Because he's got a photograph of him intimidating him in a supermarket. So, we were really starting to wonder what was going on.
Does your journalist gut say that maybe he might have been in on it in any way?
Absolutely. I think Sean seriously knows something. Why has he got an identical stab wound? Why has he got blood on his guitar? Why are the mafia telling him that he did it and he's going to hang himself tonight? He fled to Milan. He never really gave any interviews after the one when he first left the island. Every time we reach out to him, he basically tells us to go away in less polite terms. He knew David. And I've also recently found photographs of him standing around posing with a machine gun.
Hmm.
So something very suspicious going on there.
Interesting. So let me ask you this about David himself. Was David well off? Was there maybe a monetary reason to off him?
It's difficult to say. I mean, I think he comes from a fairly wealthy family, but I don't know the state of their finances. I mean, he was a university graduate. He was well dressed. So, my gut feeling was, he probably comes from a very decent upper middle class family. But, why he was friends with Sean, who's a somewhat scruffier character, with a dubious reputation. He'd been involved. Sean had been involved in some kind of child pornography photographs back in Scotland before he ever went to Thailand. So he had a dubious past. I thought, it was a bit of a misalliance between David and Sean, but there you go. People choose their friends for a variety of reasons.
Or maybe the fact that David just hung out with Sean and Sean might be in with these mafia guys for something and he welched.
Yeah, possibly. I mean, there's a million things that could have happened. Was Hannah being raped and David found her and, they then decided to kill both of them? Was Sean and David walking down the beach, found Hannah in a bad situation, tried to help? And, it's impossible to know what happened. And more so because all of the CCTV cameras on Koh Tao that, record what's going on the beach, none of them were working that night.
Interesting.
Yeah.
In that. There are other people that come into this with the idea that this, something smells not in Denmark, but in Thailand, and that they don't believe any of the evidence either as they kind of pour over the evidence. Tell me a little bit about CSILA and how you run into them throughout this investigation. CSILA
is a Thai guy. He lives in America. He's stateside, obviously. And he's got a Facebook page that, covers crime. And he had about 700,000 followers at the time. He's very well connected. He knows policemen that work on Koh Tao. He tracked down the students who were in the university in Bangkok, where the second member of the influential family fled to. The second member of the influential family said he'd been at uni in Bangkok. He wasn't on the island. We know he's on the island because we've got date stamp photographs of him on the island. University students said he absolutely was not a university that day. That he released an image of him at the university, but it looked as if the date stamp on it had been manipulated. So CSILA was literally going through every piece of evidence we could get our hands on and examining it. He was doing a much better job than the police. He did things like he posted a picture of in Thailand, when you committed a crime, you're taken back to the crime scene and you're forced to reenact the crime. And when Zorlin and Wei Pure were taken back to Koh Tao, they were reenacting the crime. And there's a photograph of that. And David from CSILA has very cleverly superimposed David Miller onto that picture with the exact proportions. So you can just see how much bigger he is than Zorlin and Wei Pure. So he was very much examining, all these bits of information. He even had some anatomically correct heads made at great expense and tried to create the same injuries on Hannah just to see if it could have been done with a garden hoe, because to us it looked like she'd been shot. So he did an amazing investigative work into these murders, and a lot of information came from that site, which now has well over 1 million followers.
Wow. You describe in the book just exactly, you call them the B2, the Burma 2, the two brothers that we're talking about. Just exactly what they were in for when they first walked into jail. And the chapters that follow, the couple of chapters that follow, are absolutely chilling as to what you can expect in a Thailand jail. Can you give our listeners just a little taste of what it's like when you first walk in, when you're first, not necessarily when you're first detained, but when you first settle in to a Thailand jail?
Thai prisons are very unpleasant places. I mean, first of all, you get your head shaved, you're stripped naked, you're thoroughly searched. They're very intimate searches for men and women, but, for men, they're embarrassing searches. You're left naked while you're processed through the system. That you have shackles welded onto your ankles. The boys were actually, the Burmese 2, as I call them, and the B2 in the book, they were actually shackled into their cell. They couldn't even leave their cell when they were first in prison. They said they were a danger to themselves and others, which frankly is ridiculous. So they haven't even got access to the tuck shop. The food you get in Thai prisons is absolutely revolting. You can't live on it. You can't get fresh water. You completely rely on donations from people on the outside who can, put credit in your prison account. But these boys couldn't even get to the tuck shop to spend the money we'd given them because they were shackled and left in a stinking hot cell all day. The cells are very, very overcrowded. There's 50 or 60 men in one cell. Water for showering is in very short supply. The prison in Koh Samui is next to a rubbish plant, a garbage plant where the incinerator's not been working for donkey's years. So there's literally, hundreds of tons of rotten rubbish next to the prison. So, there's a lot of illness in the prison. You can only see a dentist once a year. So if you've got toothache, it could be a year before you can get to see anybody. There's a lot of dysentery in the prison, HIV, malaria, tuberculosis. So yeah, they're not pleasant places.
Yeah, it was, when I was reading those chapters, it was just absolutely disgusting. Some of the things that you were describing, and you want to talk about it. I mean, we take showers for granted, in the West. And you're talking about guys who would get 2 bowls full of water for all the soap that they put on them, and then having to buy their drinking water or use their drinking water for the day to get the rest of the soap off of them.
Yes, because the water runs out, and this water is in troughs. It's not even clean water.
Right.
I mean, you can't drink the water in Thailand anyway. But I mean, this is just disgusting water. I mean, there's parasites in it. So yeah, you can imagine being in 38-degree heat with 100% humidity. You've covered yourself in soap, and now there's not enough water left to even get that off you, and you've got to use your precious drinking water well, if you're Way Pure and Zorlin, if they didn't have support from me and my group, there'd be no money to even buy that drinking water to get that soap off you. So it can be incredibly difficult in Thai prisons if you don't have support.
That's just, I shake my head when I think about the conditions. And there was something too about when you're welding the shackles, about being close to water and getting that occasional electric shock. I know that was
the welding machine's an old MIG welder.
Mm-hmm.
You have to put your foot in this kind of vice thing, and they wrap these shackles around, and then they weld them on. And there's a lot of, it's very wet. The yard where they do it is very wet. The electric cables to the welders are very worn. They spark. And they basically give you a little bit of cardboard. But the reason the floor is wet is because the shackles get hot when they weld them. So they're pouring water over the shackles to cool them down a little bit, at the same time as using these dodgy MIG welders. So, the prisoners are always incredibly worried about being electrocuted.
Oh, my God. No. That's beyond inhumane.
Yeah, pleasant.
Tell us who Andy Hall is and how he comes into your life.
So Andy, when I first found out these two guys were in prison, I called lots of organizations, for help for prisoners overseas. And Andy Hall came to the rescue, if you can call it rescue. He's a human rights lawyer. He had his own issues in Thailand. He'd been investigating human rights abuses for Burmese migrant workers. And a document had gone out from a company called Finwatch. So the Thais weren't happy that he'd exposed maltreatment of Burmese migrant workers in the country. So he had his own court cases going on. But he came down to the island and decided that he was going to assemble a defense team to help Way Pure and Zorlin. For some reason, he used his own lawyer, a guy called Nakon. And I was shocked by that because he's a civil lawyer, not a criminal lawyer. And he'd never tried a criminal case before. So I didn't think he was going to be the ideal man for the job. But, the two Burmese men had no money. The legal team they had worked pro bono. So, it was the best of a bad job, really. They withdrew their guilty statements and it went to trial. The trial didn't go very well. It seemed to be all hinging on the DNA evidence. And the judge said that the DNA that they'd got from Hannah was 100% matched to the boys. Now, in the meantime, Andy Hall has been contacted by an Australian lawyer called Ian Yarwood, and he was looking into the DNA, and he did a lot of exemplary work trying to help. And he got hold of Jane Torpin, who's a leading DNA expert in Australia, and we were very worried about the DNA evidence. We knew that the DNA from the island had been taken up to Bangkok in a beer box, just an old beer box, and we were very concerned about the chain of custody of the DNA. We were very concerned about the laboratory that tested the DNA because it didn't have the authority to do anything more than paternity tests, and the DNA came back very quickly. So Jane Torpin agreed to fly to Koh Samui and testify at the court. She'd seen the DNA evidence. That there was handwritten alterations to it. It didn't have the proper stamp on it. There was no handling or chain of custody summary with it. It was just on one page. There was bits crossed out. The chain of custody wasn't documented. There was no supporting evidence of the probability of this DNA being matched. So she, under her own steam and her own money, flies all the way down to Koh Samui to testify. And astonishingly, the defense team never called her to the stand.
What?
So they had a Thai DNA expert who did testify, and all she'd been able to do was the garden hoe that was supposed to have been used to bludgeon Hannah to death. That was in the that was an exhibit in the court. And Porn Tip, the Thai DNA expert, she'd managed to examine that, and she found 2 DNA profiles on the murder weapon. Neither one of them matched Way Pure and Zorlin. Furthermore, the mixed DNA sample from Hannah, the victim, that would have contained Hannah's DNA, and they said Way Pure's DNA, and they said Zorlin's DNA, that mixed sample, they said, was 100% matched to both boys. Well, if you've got a mixed sample, that can't be 100% matched to anybody.
Right.
So the defense team decided they wanted to independently test this DNA because all the prosecution had was a small amount of amplified DNA. So they'll take one part of it and they'll just effectively photocopy it. So it's amplified. And we didn't believe the amplified sample, and we didn't believe the chain of custody. So we asked to have independent testing done on the DNA to be told they'd lost it and it had been used up, which again is not possible. But, why the defense team did not call Jane Torpin to the stand, who could have exonerated Wei Pure and Zorlin immediately by discrediting the DNA evidence, which incidentally was the only thing the judge found them guilty on when he sentenced them to death.
Wow. Well, you can't think, even if you go back and with the photos of the crime scene, you'd have to say that the crime scene was trampled all over. How could you get a dependable DNA sample?
Exactly. I mean, the Thai expert said, it was completely ridiculous. There was no chain of custody. We don't even know if it's Wei Pure and Zorlin's DNA, because there's no chain of custody.
Right.
We don't know whose it is. We don't know where. And there was also, they did mass testing on DNA on Koh Tao. They were testing all of the Burmese migrant workers. We don't know whose DNA it was that was presented in court because there was no chain of custody. I mean, after the boys were sentenced to death, Ian Yarwood was instrumental in going after the governing bodies of these laboratories because the laboratory that the DNA was tested in was not accredited to international standards. So Ian went after BQLS, which is their governing body, and ILAC and APLAC, which are their governing bodies. And we got nowhere because, you can't expect the accrediting body to do anything to a laboratory they haven't accredited.
You've mentioned now twice that the boys were found guilty and sentenced to death. Tell me a little bit about the sentencing or the verdict first, and then the sentencing. Tell me how much shock there was at that point, being that there was such a lack of evidence.
There was such a lack of evidence. I mean, there was no CCTV footage. There were no witnesses. There was no motive. There was no prior criminal history. All we had was this 100% DNA match. But we, even though I know how corrupt the courts are, even though I know how much it was really important for Thailand to say they'd solved this crime to save their tourist industry, I didn't actually think that they would convict the men. I kind of, in the bottom of my heart, knew they would. But with such lack of evidence, I mean, even the people in the prison were saying, they're not going to get convicted. They're going home. We all know they didn't do this. Even the officers in the prison were saying these guys are innocent. The word on the street was that they were innocent. So when they were sentenced to death, it was absolutely horrifying. And the trial went on for several months, and then we had a long wait. The trial finished in October, and they weren't sentenced to death until Christmas Eve. But we found their mothers. Their mothers had come over to the island. We've been visiting the boys regularly in prison. The mothers, they're not very educated. They're just subsistence farmers. When the boys were sentenced to death, I found out later the mothers thought they were going to be executed that day. And they were just screaming the place down. I mean, we were all in complete shock. No one more than Zorlin and Wei Pure, who just couldn't believe it. They just couldn't believe they were going to be executed when they had nothing to do with it.
Well, especially when you think or you're trusting that if I just give myself up, it's 2 to 3 years. If I can just get through this, I'll be okay.
Right. And the bad thing was that I said to Zorlin, they decided to plead not guilty, which meant the death penalty was on the table. Had they pled guilty, there would be no death penalty. But Zorlin didn't realize that 2 to 3 years that had been offered by the police was only for a guilty plea. He didn't realize that if he changed his plea to not guilty, that was no longer on the table.
Wow.
Yeah. So
they were going to railroad them either way if they decided to go against what the plan was.
Yeah, pretty much so. So honestly, trying to reassure the boys they weren't going to be killed so soon was difficult. But we explained to them that there'll be an appeal. But the first appeal goes to the same judges. You've got to remember there's no jury in Thailand. There's no jury. There's only 3 judges. And the first appeal would go to the same judges that had handed down the death penalty in the first place. So we didn't hold out much hope for the first appeal, which unsurprisingly we lost. The second appeal went to the Supreme Court in Bangkok, where the whole thing was gone through again. And we did hold out some hope that someone in Bangkok would look at this, whole case and just see what a farce it was. And we held a lot of hope for that. But no, they also said that, they were happy with the evidence and they upheld the conviction.
Suzanne, I have to ask you, especially with the appeal, the initial appeal process, how do you get a true appeal when you're appealing to the same three judges who are hearing the case?
Welcome to Thailand.
It doesn't seem like what do you expect to change in that case, though? I mean, was there anything that Andy was talking to you about what can we switch up with the case that can get them to see it a different way?
At that point, you can't submit any more evidence anyway. They can only go over the notes they've already got. So, any idea of adding more evidence in at that point was too late.
I don't understand what appeal does in that case. If the judge doesn't want to see things a different way, and if you can't present something different on appeal, then what is the point?
Yeah, there you go. Now you're getting used to life in Thailand.
I scratch my head. I mean, I understand that not every justice system is the American system. I get that.
Well, they do maintain that it's based on international law. But you have to remember, at this time, it was getting really crazy because before the conviction, when we were still looking in to the murders, and I was investigating, every day, all day, every day. And I had a phone call from a guy who said that, the second powerful person had been seen leaving the island. I had an eyewitness to that. He said he saw this guy leave on a boat called Little Duck. And he sounded to me like he was Scandinavian. Anyway, on the murders happened on the 14th of September, 15th of September 2014. By November, this guy or I don't know if it was this guy, but someone from Scandinavia called me, said he'd seen this boat leaving, and he would, testify to that. And then we discovered that there's a missing diver from Koh Tao, from Scandinavia. Well, actually, he wasn't. He was Swiss, but he sounded, he had that kind of accent. And this guy had gone missing. Now, he was a diver. He'd been snorkeling off the island, just completely disappeared. No one knew where he was. A couple of days later, a dead body washes up in between Koh Tao and Koh Phangan. He's Caucasian, and we think, it must be him. But it turned out not to be him. A couple of days after that, another body washes up on the mainland, again Caucasian. We think, it must be him. But it wasn't him. A few days after that, a third body washes up at an area called Langsuan on the mainland, and that did turn out to be him. But nobody ever accounted for who the other two bodies were. Nothing in the press. The fact they were found was in the press. That was never followed up. During the investigation, I had another phone call from a French guy who lived up on the mountain and on the island. He said as well that he'd seen this guy leaving on this boat. And on New Year's Day 2015, he was found hung at his bungalow with his hands tied behind his back. Now, I can't prove that those two dead guys are the people that called me, but it was pretty chilling. Then on January the 21st, 2015, another British girl, Christina Annesley, she was found dead in her bungalow. And that bungalow was owned by the mafia guy who was taken in for questioning.
Wow.
Then on the 6th of January 2016, another British guy, Luke Miller, who shares a surname with David, was found dead at the bottom of a swimming pool on Koh Tao. They said that he dived off a DJ booth into the water to impress all the party people who were enjoying a night party in the pool, but he wasn't found till the next morning. So it's like, what happened to that guy? And I spoke to the rescue guy, the British paramedic I mentioned to you earlier, and I said, do you think he died jumping into the pool and banging his head? And he said, well, not unless he bounced a few times looking at his injuries. Ooh. So that was another unexplained death. Christina Annesley's father discovered that the last man to be seen with her was never even interviewed by the police. So he had to track him down himself.
Wow.
So all this is going on at the same time as the Burmese boys are being fitted up. And I'm reporting on all of these things and just being told, shut up. If you want to stay in Thailand, you've got to stop reporting on all of these wildly suspicious deaths. Why are you trying to hurt Koh Tao? Why are you trying to damage the reputation of Koh Tao? I then discovered that prior to the deaths of Hannah and David, in 2014 on New Year's Day, a British guy called Nick Pearson had been found dead in the ocean. He was on the island with his family celebrating Christmas and New Year. He was found dead in the water on New Year's Day, and the police said, oh, he must have walked out of his bungalow. But his bungalow was 50 feet above the ocean, and there's a really tiny path that meanders its way around all these massive granite boulders. And if he'd have tumbled down there into the water, he would have had all these broken bones. Well, he had none. So his family, completely don't understand how he wound up dead. And 2 years before that, in 2012, another British guy, Ben Harrington, was found dead on the island. He supposedly had fallen off his bike. The Thais did a roadside autopsy. They said Ben had broken his neck, but and they just wanted to cremate him the next day. Ben's mother, Pat, is a nurse in England. She insisted they didn't cremate him, got him back to the UK, and found that he had a ruptured aorta. It wasn't a broken neck, and the autopsy report from Thailand and the UK had nothing in common whatsoever. So that's another woman who just does not believe the cause of death. So now we've got Ben Harrington, Nick Pearson, Hannah Witheridge, David Miller, Hans-Peter Suter, the Swiss guy, Dimitri Povs, the French guy, Christina Annesley, the British girl, Luke Miller, the British guy. And then in 2016, in February, another girl, a Russian, completely goes missing. She's never found again. In 2017, a Belgian tourist, Elise Delamagny, was found on the island, half eaten by lizards. Supposedly committed suicide, even though her luggage had been put on a ferry to leave the island, and she never made the ferry. I mean, what is going on that island?
In all this time, the Burmese brothers are still in jail.
Yeah, they're just sitting there in prison, and they're still in prison to this day.
Unbelievable.
So in 2016, after receiving multiple warnings that if I carried on investigating all these deaths, something pretty bad's going to happen to me, I decide I'm going to not give up on Waipure and Zolin. I'm not going to not report on all of these crazy things, because these are human beings. They have families, they have lives. So I was forced to leave the country if I wanted to keep investigating. I came back to the UK in 2016, continued running my paper. I'm getting death threats left, right, and center. Having just being trolled on the internet. Life's getting pretty difficult. And then in 2018, I get contacted by a woman from London who said that her 19-year-old daughter had been brutally raped on the same beach, but she got off the island. And she also had a T-shirt that had DNA on it. And I'm like, here we go. If we can get that T-shirt with that DNA, maybe we can link all these crimes. Mm-hmm. So we get the T-shirt brought back to the UK. The girl goes to the police in the UK. Interpol were involved. I traveled to London. I interviewed the mother. I spoke to the Rape Crisis Centre where she'd reported this rape. And I'm like, wow, maybe we have a smoking gun here. We've got DNA. The next thing, the Thai police, the head Thai police in Bangkok, go ballistic. They fly down to the island in helicopters. They said that the rape never happened because it was full moon. They said the rape never happened because it's high tide. It wasn't high tide, and even if it was, there's still beach anyway. Interestingly, the police said that there could not have been a rape because it was the World Cup that night. I don't know what that's got to do with it, but anyway, they're now. There's a couple of weeks since the rape. They're wandering around the island saying there's no evidence of a rape. It's all complete rubbish. They accuse the girl of making up the story. They say they're going to extradite her back to Thailand and prosecute her for bringing Thailand into disrepute. And because I broke the story in my newspaper, they put an arrest warrant out for me, saying I'm peddling fake news. Obviously, David CSILA, he shared the story. They put an arrest warrant out for him, and they promptly arrested 15 Thai nationals who shared the story.
Wow.
So now there's an arrest warrant for me, and I'm like, well, hang on a minute. I wrote the story in the UK. My server's in Singapore. My company's registered in the Philippines. I'm not in Thailand. How am I breaking the law in Thailand?
Yeah, you're not. You're not a national.
So they tried to extradite me, but are told by the British government, well, writing a true story in the newspaper is not a crime in the UK, and in order to be extradited, it has to be whatever you've done has to be a crime in both countries. So so that's how they tried to shut me up.
Wow. That's I don't want to say unbelievable because it is believable, Suzanne. I just, I mean, that's the kind of stuff you hear about in communist regimes, but never a place like Thailand.
Believe me, yeah. So anyway, I carried on writing my newspaper despite all of this, nonsense going on. But it got too much for me. By 2020, I'd absolutely had enough. I had one really credible death threat from Thailand that the local police here were involved. I was walking around with a GPS, a police-linked alarm. My house was alarmed. I had panic alarms in the house. It was just getting, too much. And eventually I closed the Samui Times, although I kept the Facebook page. But I started writing the book because I thought, you know what? If something happens to me, I want this story to still be out there. I want people to know that Wei Pure and Zorlin are still stuck in that stinking prison. They're now in Bangkok, the Bangkok Central Prison. It's called Bang Kwang. It's also known as the Bangkok Hilton. Mm-hmm. The Thai call it the Big Tiger for its ability to eat men alive. Throughout the pandemic, the boys tell me that, they've been allowed no visits. They're not allowed exercise time in the yard. And many, many prisoners now are just killing themselves because they can't cope with the conditions, the isolation. Wei Pure and Zorlin have had no embassy visits. They've not heard from their parents for a long, long time. Both of their fathers are dead, but they've not heard from their families because there's obviously a military coup in Burma. So, these boys are battling. They can't see a future. And I'm trying to give them one. And I thought, you know what? I'm just going to write this book because I want to give the families of all of these victims. I'm in touch with them. We have a support group. We all look after each other. We all collaborated on the documentary. We collaborated on the book. And we just want the story to be out there. We want, hopefully, new witnesses to come forward. We want people to be incredibly careful before they go traveling and be aware that, when things go wrong, they go really wrong, and there's very little help from the embassies, and there's certainly no help from the police. So, I've just taken a huge risk and written this book and put it out there.
Has there been additional heat since you've written the book? Have you been contacted by anyone from Thailand?
Not yet. And people who know Thailand very, very well said to me when they go quiet, that's when you're in real trouble. So at the moment, I've heard nothing, which is slightly worrying. Although when I did first get involved with Wild Blue Press, they gave me a page on their website, and that was immediately attacked by trolls, accusing me of all manner of crimes I hadn't committed. And they actually had to turn the comments page off because this is prior to the book being released because, people were trying to discredit me before the book had even been published. Thankfully, Wild Blue Press are a really solid publishing company, and they stood by me and still published the book. But they very quickly realized there's forces out there who did not want the truth to come out. So, I really appreciate them standing by me on this one.
If people want to help you or CSILA or any of the groups that are trying to help these two Burmese brothers that are in prison right now, how do they go ahead and do that?
Obviously buying the book helps because I've been funding the boys now for 7.5 years with my own funds, donated funds, and there's another great lady who raises funds for them. But, it's difficult to raise funds for them, especially with the pandemic when so many people have lost their jobs. So buying the book will help because that will give us some money to keep these boys going for what could be the rest of their lives in prison. Spreading the word, really, there's lots of posts on Facebook, on social media, share those. We're hoping that people, there must be people who were on the island at the time who perhaps left now and are willing to come forward. I mean, the fact there were no witnesses to the murders of Hannah and David is really telling, because if Wei Pure and Zorlin had killed them, Wei Pure and Zorlin would not, have any influence over anybody. So if it had been them, people would have come forward. The fact that nobody did come forward because they were too scared to come forward leads me to believe, it was somebody else who committed these crimes. But many of those people who didn't come forward, they may have left Thailand now. They may be able to come forward and speak now. So, really just spread the word, spread this story. Let's try and find any new information that we can find. We can't prove the boys are innocent, but we can prove someone else is guilty. So, just spread the word, spread the story.
Most definitely. And folks, there's a lot more in this book than what we've covered here today. There's there's mafia hits. There's a lot of details and gory details at that about what exactly the brothers have went through throughout this entire story of theirs of being falsely accused of the murders there in Koh Tao. The name of the book is The Curse of the Turtle, The True Story of Thailand's Backpacker Murders. Suzanne Buchanan has been our guest and the author of this book. There's a link in the description of this program that you need to click, and you can go ahead and get that book from Wild Blue Press and go ahead and support Suzanne and the quest to try and get these Burmese brothers free from their imprisonment in Thailand. So, Suzanne, I want to thank you very much for joining us today. I appreciate it.
But an absolute pleasure speaking to you. Thanks so much for having me on the show.
Well, thank you. And folks, it's a time where if you're listening to the free version of the show, we must bid you adieu. But if you don't want to leave us right now, you don't necessarily have to. What you can do is you can go to Stitcher.com, click on the subscribe button under Stitcher Premium. That will get you to listen to Dumb Crime, Stupid Criminals. That'll get you to listen to the ad-free version of Darkness Radio. And that'll get you to listen to hundreds of podcasts ad-free and expand your audio horizons more than you could possibly ever imagine. And the best thing is you can do it for just $5 a month. Do it right now. Go to Stitcher.com, click on that premium button, subscribe to Stitcher Premium for just $5 a month. You'll get Dumb Crime, Stupid Criminals as far as True Crime Tuesday. You'll get an ad-free Darkness Radio. And of course, you'll get hundreds of podcasts ad-free and expand those audio horizons. Go ahead and do it today.